Hello everyone, in this video presentation I'll be answering the question, can the US transition to an economy that doesn't rely on the use of petroleum? So petroleum is used for many things. It's used for making gasoline for cars, making plastics, chemicals, and a lot of other things. All of these, once they're ultimately used up or thrown away, will end up causing land pollution, water pollution, air pollution, and climate change. So it's important to find an answer to this question because we need to find a way to reduce and ultimately eliminate petroleum from the US's consumption, or else we'll just continue spewing out pollution and causing climate change at a rate that isn't sustainable in the long run. This is an economics question because cutting out the trade of petroleum from the US's economy raises concern for GDP growth and unemployment rates. So could the US transition to an economy that doesn't rely on the use of petroleum? Short answer, yes, it could. Because there are many good alternatives to petroleum products such as biodegradable plastics and electric vehicles and renewable power sources such as wind and solar, we could make the transition to a petroleum-free economy. So currently the petroleum industry supports about 10.3 million jobs in the US and accounts for about 8% of the country's GDP, according to the American Petroleum Institute. And that's a lot considering that the US's nominal GDP was valued at about $21.7 trillion at the end of 2019. So all of these alternatives to petroleum will still require a lot of labor to produce. So think of the electric cars and biodegradable plastics. They'll still need people to make those. So this should be able to support all the jobs that were lost from the petroleum industry. And each of these products, once produced, will still be sold as a final product, which will fuel the GDP. It's not like we're removing electricity and vehicles from the GDP completely. We're just replacing them with a petroleum-free alternative. So if you look at the graph here, you'll see that around the world, biodegradable plastic and bio-based plastic industries are growing and have been forecasted to grow even more in the near future. So this indicates that there's already a demand for petroleum-free products, and that demand will likely continue to grow as time goes on. So this transition to a petroleum-free economy could potentially increase the prices of these staples, such as electricity, plastics, and vehicles, etc. So because the demand for electricity, for example, is inelastic, that shouldn't change the price increase shouldn't change the quantity demanded too much. However, goods like plastics and private vehicles have a rather elastic demand since someone could always hold off for a few years without buying a new car, or how companies could use perhaps paper for packaging rather than plastic. So one limitation that I have to answering this question is that I don't know if the US can realistically produce enough renewable resources to meet the newly increased demand that the alternative to petroleum products will require. Since petroleum alternatives like biodegradable plastic rely on renewable resources to produce, such as agricultural goods, the US would have to amplify production of these goods to meet the newly increased demand. And failure to keep up with this increased demand could result in some severe shortages that could have some pretty dire consequences. Another limitation for my answer to this question is that I don't know how long it would take for the US to transition to a petroleum-free economy, so who knows for how long the US would have to risk a recession while the transition to a petroleum-free economy is underway. So my whole claim here is assuming perfect competition. If this assumption were to change and the requirements for perfect competition weren't met, like for example if there were a monopoly running the market for a certain field of petroleum-dependent commodities such as electricity or plastics, then my answer would likely be incorrect. The economy wouldn't be able to transition towards being petroleum-free, at least not in the short run, because these monopolies wouldn't want to change their whole business to being petroleum-free, because that's where all their money comes from. I'm rather confident that my assumptions of perfect competition are correct because the US government tries to prevent monopolies in an effort to promote perfect competition for the good of its citizens and people that want to start new businesses and keep their own businesses running.